For the better part of a century, the US and Iran have been caught in this standoff. It's shaped so much of our modern world. So today we're going to unravel how we got here and what it all means for the future. So let's start with a really strange question. Why would the United States be willing to go to war to stop a nuclear program that it actually helped create? Yeah, you heard that right. Back in 1957, the US gave Iran its very first nuclear reactor. So what on earth happened?
Well, the answer, as you might guess, isn't really about the weapons themselves. It's much bigger than that. It's about oil. It's about power. And believe it or not, it's about the dominance of the US dollar. To really get what's at stake here, we have to rewind the clock.
Okay, so let's start with part one, the fight for oil. To understand what's happening now, you have to go all the way back to the 1950s. Picture this. Iran has all this oil, right? But the crazy part is the profits aren't going to the Iranian people. Nope, they're going straight to Britain. And then one man comes along and decides enough is enough. So in 1951, Iran's prime minister, a guy named Mohammad Mossadegh, who was, by the way, democratically elected, he does something huge. He nationalizes the oil industry. He basically says, this oil belongs to Iran. Now, you can imagine this did not go over well in the West. So the CIA and Britain's MI6 cook up a plan called Operation Ajax. It's a full-on coup. They overthrow Mossadegh and install their own guy, the pro-Western Shah. And right there, that single event, that's where this deep-seated mistrust really begins. For so many Iranians, this was an absolute national humiliation. From their perspective, the US just came in and crushed their democracy just to put a puppet in charge. This is the origin story for that death to America sentiment you hear about. It became a scar that, frankly, never really healed. Now, things really start to escalate when the US makes a move that ties its entire economic dominance to Middle Eastern oil. This wasn't just about a few companies making money anymore. No, this was about America's survival. So fast forward to 1971. The US makes a huge change. It gets off the gold standard. To make sure the dollar stayed valuable, it made a deal, a really clever one, with Saudi Arabia. The deal was basically, we'll give you military protection, and in return, you only sell your oil in US dollars. And just like that, the petrodollar system was born. And this created this perfect self-perpetuating loop. Think about it. If you're a country and you need to buy oil, you have to buy US dollars first. This creates a constant, massive demand for the currency. Then, what do the oil nations do with all those profits, those petrodollars? They invest them right back into the US. The US then uses that money to fund its incredibly powerful military, which then turns around and protects the very oil fields and regimes that keep the whole system going. It's kind of a genius move, and it gives the US this incredible power to sanction anyone by just cutting them off from dollars. So for years, this system worked like a charm for the US, and the Shah's Iran was a really important piece of that puzzle. But then came 1979, and overnight, the entire chessboard was flipped upside down. All that resentment from the 1953 coup, it just boiled over. The Iranian people rose up, they overthrew the Shah, and in his place came Ayatollah Khomeini. He established an Islamic Republic that was fundamentally anti-American. And he didn't just walk away from the alliance, he threatened the entire petrodollar system itself. Then came the brutal Iran-Iraq War. The US backed Saddam Hussein, even though they knew he was using chemical weapons on Iranians. Imagine how that felt for Iran, completely and utterly alone. Years later, they watch as the US invades Iraq and takes down Saddam. For the leaders in Tehran, the lesson was crystal clear. If America wants you gone, and you don't have the ultimate weapon, you're toast. A nuclear bomb wasn't just a weapon anymore. It was the ultimate insurance policy. And that realization, right there, set the stage for the conflict we're seeing today. It kicked off this long, ugly, covert war over Iran's nuclear ambitions. The US and Israel simply could not let Iran get a bomb, so they went to work. They launched sophisticated cyber attacks like the Stuxnet virus, which physically destroyed centrifuges, and they assassinated key nuclear scientists. Then, in 2015, the Obama administration tried a different approach. Diplomacy, and we got the JCPOA nuclear deal. But that didn't last. In 2018, President Trump pulled the US right back out, and the cycle of escalation started all over again, with Iran now enriching uranium to 60% purity, which is just a tiny step away from weapons grade. And that brings us to 2023, when the International Atomic Energy Agency reported something chilling. Iran's breakout time, that's the time it would take to get enough enriched uranium for one bomb, had shrunk to just 12 days. The fuse on this thing got incredibly short. So Iran knows it can't go toe-to-toe with the US military. It can't match them dollar for dollar or jet for jet. So it developed a completely different playbook, asymmetric warfare. It's all about turning America's biggest strengths into its greatest weaknesses.
Look at this comparison. It tells you everything. The US has these billion-dollar aircraft carriers. Iran's answer? A swarm of cheap speedboats in a narrow waterway. The US has $300 million radar systems. Iran has $2,000 attack drones that can take them out. See the strategy? Iran isn't trying to win a fair fight. It's trying to make the cost of starting a fight just too high for the US and its allies to bear.
And Iran's ace in the hole, its ultimate point of leverage, comes down to this one number, 20%. That's how much of the entire world's oil supply has to pass through a tiny little choke point right off Iran's coast, the Strait of Hormuz. And by just threatening to close that strait, Iran doesn't just put pressure on the US. It can hold the economies of major world powers hostage. Think about Japan, China, India. They are hugely dependent on that oil. This gives Iran the power to create a global crisis that pressures Washington to back down, all without ever firing a shot directly at America. And here's the final piece of their strategy. Why attack the superpower when you can attack its friends? The Gulf states rely on the Strait of Hormuz for almost all of their food and water. Those are easy targets. And by attacking the U.S. bases hosted in those countries, Iran cleverly turns America's military presence from a shield into a bullseye. It makes it a liability, forcing those allies to beg the U.S. to de-escalate. Which brings us to this final, pretty sobering thought. Iran is convinced that a nuclear weapon is the only thing that guarantees its survival. The United States is convinced that a nuclear Iran would completely shatter its security and its economic power in the Middle East. So when one side's survival is the other side's absolute red line, is peace even possible?